My name is Tyler Fornes, and I am one of the co-hosts of the Good, the Bad, and the Hungy AEW podcast here on the Voice of Wrestling Podcasting Network. We take a broad scope approach to the world of All Elite Wrestling and the entire universe of Tony Khan. We talk about the big matches, the big stars, the promos, the storylines, and we also look at it from a big picture perspective. How are things going to change over the course of the next 10 years with AEW still in the picture? How are companies like WWE going to adapt and adjust to AEW? Are they going to be a similar way like they did with WCW in the late 1990s? Will there be a counterpunch? We talk about all of that and more on The Good, the Bad, and the Hungy every week on the Voices of Wrestling Network.
This podcast is a member of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. Visit voicesofwrestling.com to hear the rest of our great podcasts, as well as show reviews, columns, opinions, and updates across the world of wrestling.
To the highway in a brand new day. Gotta let it go. So fast to finger down. Stars tonight together. Here everyone is singing. 你看到我就怕，头皮发麻，我的手。
Welcome back to Open the Voice Gate for March 31st, 2026. We are members of the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network. You can find us on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network feed or on our own dedicated Open the Voice Gate feed, wherever you get your podcasts. You could follow us on social media at Open Voice Gate. And if you'd like to donate to the show, click the link in there in our show notes. It'll take you to our redcircle.com landing site. You click a red box that says sponsor this podcast, and you can accept a one-time or reoccurring donation. No obligation whatsoever for the donations, but we would like to thank all of our previous donors. I am one of your hosts. It's your old pal, Mike Spears, join along your other host, Case Lowe. In case it seems like that Dragongate and the Greater Dragon System is not leaving March in any sort of a chill fashion. We have to go kind of immediately today into first an announcement from Daya, who we're now going to refer to Dragon Daya as Daya, at 5:55 Central Daylight Time, and then a Spora blog from Dragongate near immediately after 8:23 a.m. Central Standard Time that Dragon Daya has left Dragongate. This is something that we were talking about. I was going to say alluding to heavily, Case, a couple weeks ago when we were talking about the Shima and Magnum Tokyo talk show and Dragongate response to that. But we were talking about that then, but 2 weeks later, it's come to pass. Dragon Daya has left Dragongate, and the way that his departure has been stated by both parties has been really kind of interesting, guys.
Yeah, God, we had to rip up the run sheet for this one. I had some boring anecdotes about old Ultimo Guerrero matches that I've been watching that I was really hoping to lead off the podcast with. And don't worry, at some point, I'm sure we'll get to that, as 98, 99, 2000 Ultimo Guerrero is becoming the only type of wrestling that I enjoy lately. But this is the type of thing that you and I saw coming. You know, I felt very strong in my reporting from a few weeks ago that Daya was definitely done with Dragongate, which is what we said on the Shima Magnum Tokyo show. What his next step is to be determined. I think it would be extremely foolish to not think that despite his statement saying that he is not going anywhere for the foreseeable future, I think it would be extremely foolish to not still have an eyebrow raised at the ongoing Super Juniors announcement, at the
Right.
Tiger Mask Black Tiger situation going on with New Japan and CMLL. I've seen that mentioned today. I would at least have an antenna up there, but there's also just a chance that Daya goes away. But this is a promotion, I remember making this point when Kento and Fujiwara left a few years ago when they were ousted from the promotion. And we did an episode in which we talked about how the amount of exits that were happening in Dragongate at the time were actually not all that historically different from anything sort of post T2P on. It actually has been a promotion that has seen a lot of movement in and out, with the main thing being you sometimes don't notice it because there's always so much going in that sometimes the departures, the exits are not as noticeable. This Dragon Dia departure feels different on a few levels. I think the company response to it is different than the normal departure. I think the roster response to this is fascinating, and I think that's different than your normal departure. And I also think while there have been bigger stars that have left the promotion throughout the course of, 20, 25 years, almost, I mean, God, we're coming up on 30 before you know it, from the Toryumon landing, the departure of a Magnum Tokyo, the departure of an Eita. This one feels different, and this one feels like it's going to really, really hurt in the short term and really, really hurt in the long term. And I'm not sure if you're somebody that is maybe only at this point watching the big shows and you're a lapsed Dragongate fan and you're listening to this to try to keep up on the happenings here. We'll go through the timeline of Daya's career after we get through some of this just, boilerplate departure stuff. But there are things that Daya represents to Dragongate at large that do not feel incidental in the way that he was portrayed and the way that he was represented on the roster. And it is the type of thing that even if you get really lucky and stumble into something like this, again, it is something that is incredibly hard to duplicate, whereas you have your superstar rookies like a Kento and a Fujiwara, and you have your strong mid-card heels like a Kazuma Sakamoto or a Kaito Ishida. Those are just some of the more recent names that have left. Those are all names that in one way or another, with where they were at in the promotion, felt replaceable. The loss of Kento, I think, is a guy who we pegged as a future Dreamgate champion. The loss of Fujiwara, a guy that you and I pegged as a future Dreamgate champion. Those losses hurt, do not get me wrong. But there was something different about where Daya is at in his career, and something different about the character that Daya portrayed that I think is just a gut punch to a promotion that is just on a 2-month skid that in the 10 plus years now of covering Dragongate, I haven't seen something quite like this. I've seen the promotion be worse for longer periods of time. I've seen the promotion suffer more bad news and bad PR throughout the course of nearly 11 years. I don't think I've seen what's happened in February and March happen, though. This is a very interesting point in the history of Dragongate.
Yeah, and it's a moment that I feel like that there's ways to look at everything that has happened essentially over the last 45 days and look at it in some sort of like heuristic kind of like this could all be connected together sort of ways. Like there's the seeking a golden thread to connect all these things that are happening together, I think is possible, but it feels like that it's also having two events with a bunch of little ways that they have overlapped, but they just both kind of fired off at the same time. I think that when we take a look at the departures, and especially like when we talk about what Dragon Dia has been to Dragongate for the last 7 years, really. I mean, he debuted towards the end of 2018, but it's a huge cultural morale hit to the fabric of what the Dragon system is. Like, to me, when the departures of your SBKs and Fujiwaras were happening in 2023, and like the big names of like, okay, these two guys are leaving in this sort of fashion, and then having Kaito Ishida leaving soon after, and a big thing is like, how bad is this for the fabric of Dragongate at that time? And I think that we look at what happened today, and this kind of departure, and one that like we have been seeing and kind of preparing for a month now, I think is up there of a departure as Milano Collection AT, to be honest, and especially in the way of speaking about like the dragon lineage and how things have played out, and it really does a level of harm that he has left the promotion in a way that I would argue that none of the other exits have to this point, with the exception of Shima and the Strongheart split. Like, this is, to me, at least if I want to think about it from like a spiritual sense, like a big part of the heart of Dragongate was is not there anymore.
Yeah, I've been struggling to think of the historical comp for this, and maybe Milano is the closest thing, because it doesn't quite feel like Magnum's the answer. It doesn't quite feel like H is the answer. He's too far established in his career for it to be, one of the young guys that have been lost over the years. But, to go back to my point about just the short term and the long term of this, I remember when Kaito Ishida left the promotion, and this was at a time in which I felt like a lot of people were voicing opinions about Dragongate that were a little bit behind the eight ball, and were covering a promotion that no longer existed. And I felt like there was publicity around Kento and Fujiwara and all these other losses that were happening at the time that I didn't agree with. And I thought a lot of people misread the Ishida thing, which I, accurately predicted. It was going to hurt far more in the short term than it would the long term. Glate popped exactly one house, the only house they've ever popped, with Ishida and with, more importantly, Jun Kasai. And then Ishida has gone on to be a completely irrelevant wrestler over the course of the last 4 years. Kaito Ishida is somebody that is replaceable in a way that Dragon Dia is not. And you're right, it goes into the heart and the soul of this promotion. And something that you and I talk about, especially in the context of Jackie Kame, is I think the reason that you and I like Kame so much, despite him being, on his worst day, I think one of the 10 best wrestlers in the world, and my God, was he the best wrestler on that Kobe Sambo Hall show, he and Rita together, that at some point we're going to talk about on this episode. But, I think Kame, from an in-ring standpoint, represents the Energizer Bunny that is Dragongate, the at times Genki Horiguchi-esque role of just this paint by numbers babyface that tries and has effort and has heart in a way that isn't really represented in All Japan or Noah or New Japan historically. DDT has its own
like
version of this.
It's like a Von Erich in World Class kind of thing.
Yeah, there's just a very specific Dragongate archetype that, I think you and I and other people that have followed the promotion for years and years now, we sort of look at Genki Horiguchi as the pillar of that. It's why some people have Genki Horiguchi on their Mount Rushmore. And I draw the comparison to Kame at times being the modern day version of that. But Dia has that, not necessarily from an in-ring standpoint, but he has, in a way, and you tell me if you disagree, but Dia has become not the face of the modern generation of Dragongate, but almost the mascot of the modern generation of Dragongate. And that is the type of thing that I for as good as Ryoya Tanaka is, and for as good as Kame is, for as good as Rita is, and I wish they would do more with Rita and Kame, even though we sit here today with them being Twin Gate champions, I still somehow think they're underpushed.
If we get to Kobe case, I have a crazy Kame Rita thing I want to propose.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to that. But those guys, for as good as they are not what Dia was. And the first thing that somebody hit me up about this morning, as I was talking about this with somebody that lives in Japan and goes to a lot of Dragongate shows, the first thing they mentioned to me was, this is a huge loss because Dia is huge with children, which is the type of thing that is not quantifiable in any massive way. I don't think that shakes the foundation of this promotion to its core, but it is the type of thing where somebody hears Dia, or somebody who goes to a lot of Dragongate shows hears Dia's departing, and they go, Oh, that's going to be bad. That's going to be bad for kids. That's going to be bad for families. That is bad news for Dragongate. And that is the sort of thing that Daya, on top of the, hey, maybe he doesn't matter a ton in the context of being in a New Japan tournament, but him being in a New Japan tournament matters a ton in the context of Dragongate, and him doing well and being brought back not only after the first Super Juniors tournament, but then for a Super Juniors Tag League, and then for another Super Juniors tournament, and then he and Dragon Kid going to WXW last year. You know, that is the type of thing that he really seemed to assimilate into that role really nicely. And as I was looking at his career today and going through his cage match and going through some of my notes, you know, he's been a lot of different things at a lot of different times. And I think our expectations of Dragon Dia have wildly fluctuated throughout the years. There's been times where we've considered him to be, you know, the second coming of Dragon Kid, which is in essence the gimmick, you know, the third coming of Ultimo Dragon, if you will. And there are times where he's been a nice steady hand. And then there's been, you know, levels in between that. But it does feel like, for whatever reason, that stretch in 2024 where he went from what was not a spectacular Super Juniors output by any means, but just him going Super Juniors into that Bravegate match with Hyo at World, which was the biggest Bravegate match in years, all the way through the title versus title match with Yamato at the end of 2024. Everything from that point on, it just felt like we finally understood who Dragon Dia was, what he was meant to do, and like he had finally found his calling within the roster. And that took up a really valuable role in this promotion that is now gone.
Yeah, and it's a kind of role, and really the mascot is, it feels almost demeaning, but as we are recording this on the day the 20th anniversary of Do Fixer versus Blood Generation, and at least his mentor and the guy whose mantle he picked up, Dragon Kid, the fact is that having this kind of mascot that is out there, especially like doing the international kind of shows, and one of like the real frustrating things about like the reemergence of Dragon Gate USA for me has been the rosters, and essentially with what is like not necessarily like a move towards the newer generation of Dragon System wrestlers, but Kid has always been that mascot that Dio had slowly started to inhabit, especially with like those New Japan appearances. Really were like the seal of affirmation of him being that kind of wrestler. And I mean, not to start our like history with him in the middle of it, but when you look at the at least last 5 years of the promotion, outside of a stretch of Hyo, one person has been the number one most popular person in the promotion ever since over that 5 year period. It's Dia, and a lot of that is the kids and the families, and it's like the rug getting ripped out, at least when you look at where the company is, and like tentatively looking towards the future, and not just like the future as in like the touring kind of like month to month aspect, but like who is like there to kind of step up and kind of inhabit that sort of role.
I agree. I think that's well said. So before I want to break down the career of Dia in full, but before we do that, you have the statement from Dia, you have the statement from the promotion. Let's start with the statement from Dia, because chronologically that's what came out first, and then we'll break that sort of stuff down.
Right. So it goes, this was at 5:55 at least Central Standard Time. To everyone, first, I sincerely apologize for the sudden absence from matches and the lack of updates on social media, which caused concern. Up until now, I've had repeated discussions with the promotion about my future. After considering both sides' perspectives, we came to the conclusion that it would be best for each of us to go our separate ways. Therefore, after taking into account my future and my personal life, I've decided to leave the promotion as of this month. Additionally, in order to take time to reflect and recharge going forward, I'll be temporarily suspending my activities April 1st. The experiences and lessons I've gained in this promotion are irreplaceable assets to me. I'm deeply Grateful to everyone involved. I would also like to again express my thanks to all the fans who have supported me. Going forward, I will continue to walk the path I believe in and strive to return to the ring as a more developed and improved version of myself. I would be happy if you would continue to support me. And then he follows that up with a supplemental tweet that this is a supplementary note. It seems that various speculations have circulated during the time where I couldn't post updates, but there are no facts of major injuries or physical or mental ailments, nor any incidences or causing or being in trouble. There's also no fact of having a contract with any specific organization, and that this decision is entirely based on my own free will. I'm sorry for this inconvenience. So that's what Daya said. It's also worth noting he has completely changed all of his social medias to just all caps Daya, and his social media is first post he's had in since his last match in Osaka on February 28th.
I think the biggest takeaway I have from that is just the clarification that there's no physical or mental toll that has sidelined him. That, to me, for him to specify that is a really interesting part. And it's why I think you have to keep an antenna up of like, okay, he says he's not going anywhere, but it also wouldn't shock me if all caps Daya finds his way onto the New Japan VTR here in just a few days. But it's a very interesting statement. I mean, it immediately made me think of when we were breaking down the Shima Magnum Tokyo talk show from a few weeks ago. And I'm not saying that this was Magnum Tokyo talking to Dragon Daya, but Magnum Tokyo has the part in the talk show in which he says that he was just talking to a Dragongate wrestler who has thought about quitting many, many times and is unsure of what to do. And Magnum Tokyo told him that he needed to quit the promotion. And now here we are a month removed from that, and Dragon Daya is no longer part of the Dragongate roster.
Yeah, and I also it's worth noting that and as we get into what Dragongate says, like that there is a aspect about this that is kind of not to be that is an open question. To be frank, there's a third party that is at least as promoted by Dragongate, there is a third party who's gotten involved with this. So there is a direct kind of form of conflict in these statements, I would say. Just to start
and that has been one of the things that's been discussed today that I don't know if anybody has proper clarification on, because I the term agent has been used, but John Carroll, friend of the show, former VoiceGate host, mentioned, there is the thing in Japan of hiring somebody to help quit your normal job, let alone an odd job like Dragongate. I don't know what that third party is exactly.
Yeah, so this is something that has been brought up like since the Magnum talk. So and it's something that has been a big cultural issue within Japan itself, is that essentially employers not allowing employees to leave companies easily, like trying to like withhold pay, withhold benefits, like just like outright say you can't quit this job, just like that kind of extortion. And now there is a third party that will basically act as your agent into being able to quit these companies. And that is something that Magnum talks about with Shinshiro Tatagi. I have kind of like gone like deep into like this phrasing that's going on here. It's like Dragongate does not make mention of a like these quitting agencies, and that phrase is never used in what Dragongate uses. What they use is the phrase that they use is Daririn, which is essentially like a representative, but not a lawyer. They did not, but someone who is authorized as an intermediary. Could it be one of these third-party quitting companies that has been mentioned? It could be. Could it be some sort of other sort of management, like how a lot of the more pop culture based like Joshi have like their other like idol and talent contracts? Like, could that be happening? I've never heard of Daya having any sort of management, so
I don't know if I've ever heard of any Dragongate wrestler having any sort of management.
like the one person that I would wonder, like, just because he does a lot of like PR hits, would be if Yamato has that kind of thing. Like Yamato did like a talk about investing last week. Like that was like, let's invest with Yamato. That I was just like, I really hope that this is not like one of those things that Masato Yoshino got involved in, and that's why Masato Yoshino is on this side of all of the Cold War going on right now. But like Yamato's the only one that I would suspect, you know.
Yeah, I thought that was also very telling from the Dia piece, was just the mention of that, because I'm not going to pretend to have any knowledge of Dragongate contracts outside of, I
Yeah.
would say the very, very basic, but I've never heard of an agent being involved for any of these wrestlers.
No, and that is not necessarily something that's happened within Japanese pro wrestling writ large, to be honest. Like that, like your Barry Bloom kind of agent, or I guess that's what whoever that guy who flamed out from that one agency who wouldn't stop tweeting. I don't think that there is necessarily those kinds of figures within Japanese wrestling.
Yeah, very much so. So that is Dia's statement.
Yep.
I, I guess before you read the company statement,
Yeah.
this came in chronologically. I was following this in real time this morning, and what I found to be so interesting was that pretty immediately the roster started their outpouring of support, whether it be the tweet from Shun of saying just quit wrestling, which was very funny, or, Daiki and I think KZ and Tanaka and Marcus Mathers, these guys sharing these very heartfelt messages, sending their condolences to Dia and wishing him best in the future. And that is the sort of thing that, I don't know, we see when guys retire. We saw that when Kness said goodbye a few years ago. It's certainly not the
Right.
treatment. It's certainly not the treatment that that Kento or Fujiwara or Ishida got, and it
Or
made the
Okamura.
or Akuda for that matter. But
Mm-hmm.
for it, when like Riki Hashi or Takuma Nishikawa retired, there were gratitude type tweets that were sent out. So it's a case by case basis, and you can normally tell where the company stands with the wrestler based on what the wrestlers are tweeting about the departed wrestler. That's what makes the statement from Dragongate so interesting to me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the fact that this is publicly acknowledged by wrestlers in comparison to Okamura, whose passing was not publicly acknowledged by both the company and by wrestlers themselves, probably under pressure from the company itself.
Yeah, exactly. So why don't you read the statement from Dragongate?
All right. This one is much longer, so bear with me. To our friends and all related parties, we would like to express our sincere gratitude for your continued support of Dragongate. Recently, a statement was posted on social media by our contracted wrestler, Dragon Dia, announcing his departure from the company. We would like to provide an explanation from our side in regarding to this matter. First, we deeply apologize for causing concern to everyone, as well as the delay in providing this explanation. Dragon Dia had previously expressed his intention to leave the company. However, as this occurred during the term of his exclusive contract with us, it required coordination and response across various areas, and we intended to proceed through proper discussions. We did not insist on strict enforcement of every contractual obligation. We believe that the best course of action would be for both sides to meet face to face and discuss matters directly. We communicated to Dragon Dia as well. However, we were notified through his representative that Dragon Dia would be leaving the company as of the end of February 2026. As discussions came to be conducted through a representative, we were unable to engage in constructive and smooth dialogue, and were left with no choice but to proceed in accordance with the terms of the contract. From our standpoint, we cannot accept a departure that effectively leaves behind the fans and related parties. Additionally, because discussions were being handled through a representative, we refrained from making a public announcement from our side. We made every attempt to hold the March 15th Nagano event as a homecoming show for Dragon Dia, but ultimately were unable to do so. We sincerely apologize to the fans who are looking forward to it. And in light of Dragon Daya's recent announcement, we have determined that it is necessary for us to provide this explanation. As we believe further discussions through representatives will be required, we ask for your understandings as we are unable to provide detailed information at this time. Dragongate Co. Limited.
So that's a lot there. I'll throw it to you first. What do you make of that?
Well, first and foremost, Dragon Gate's language does not saying that that they have released Daya from his contract. Like, they say explicitly that he is still contracted with Dragon Gate. So that was something that kind of at least in this statement, kind of raised my eyebrow a little bit. It does seem that as soon as Daya had this representative third party, that everything in this kind of broke down and seemed like that essentially Daya was on ice for a month, and then Daya decided to make it public, and then Dragon Gate kind of released the statement.
I've never seen. I agree with that. I've never seen in my history of covering the promotion. I've never seen the roster have a dissenting public opinion from what the company themselves are saying, and that to me is the part of this where I tug my collar and I wonder what the long-term ramifications are when you have again, your Mochizuki Juniors and your Akis and your Ryoya Tanakas all wishing him the best. And then you have what feels like a very damning statement from Dragongate saying that he's in breach of contract, he's not fulfilling his duties, and as far as we're concerned, he's not going anywhere because he's still under contractual obligation to Dragongate.
Yeah, I do think mentioning the Homecoming show and that kind of thing from Dragon Gate's side, that's not usually a thing that in these kinds of things ever gets brought up. And that is another kind of pointed thing towards Daya about this, that essentially, at least my read of this, is that Dragon Gate's essentially throwing Daya under the bus for this show. And if you're and saying, like, if you're frustrated with this, it's kind of Daya's fault for that this Homecoming show did not happen.
Which is I would say not typically the way that Dragon Gate has done things.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of like that. I mean, it seems that Daya essentially said after the last match he had on the 28th that he was done, and that terms of his exit should be, and I don't know this is just me kind of reading the tea leaves here, case kind of seems like he's like, I'm leaving this in hands of this person, this third party, to handle this, but I'm gone. I also think it's worth noting that when Daya says he's taking time to kind of recharge and stuff like this, I don't think that should be like seen as Daya is, unless legally there is a legal thing about this, that Daya is going to go away before Best of the Super Juniors,
Yeah, I mean, that's what this entire situation now reads like to me, is Daya's going to change his name and is going to go away for a little bit. And whenever that Dragon Gate contract runs out, and I don't know when that would be. I mean, this is a guy that debuted in November of 2018. Maybe he has a contract that starts and ends in November. I have no idea. But now it seems like he's making his stance very clear that he's just holding out until he's legally allowed to work elsewhere.
Yeah, that's kind of the way that I have to that I can read this, it does kind of feel like that. A couple of weeks ago when we were talking about the Shima and Magnum things and how culture can calcify over a period of time with this, it does kind of reek to me of, oh, this is not how like Dragon Gate wants to have him and do a face-to-face conversation. It wants to do like things on kind of their terms in a way that, like, I really think that there's the cultural kind of difference towards like free agency, at least within like the contracts with wrestling, with wrestlers in Japan. But there's just a part about that part of Dragon Gate saying it just rubs me really the wrong way about how they are now getting real kind of pointed as soon as it became not Dia exclusively towards Dragongate, when as soon as he brought in kind of a third party to take care of whatever needed to be taken care of in this instance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, look, again, I go back to the thing with the roster, wishing him well and the company not, and just having sort of an uneasy feeling in my stomach as I went throughout the day that this and it also goes to, you know, I should pull up Jay's Blue Sky post real quick, where Jay said, quote, "For promotion with a 20-year plus history of this type of thing, this is the worst one yet," end quote. And Jay said that, and then, you know, quote tweeted it by saying, "And I said that before getting the company side post. Oh boy." I don't know. I feel like this is going to have ripple effects that I don't want to say are going to be permanently damaging to the Dragongate brand. I would be lying if I said it at some point today, it didn't cross my mind that this could be the type of thing that eventually sinks this promotion as a relevant promotion. Not specifically the Dia departure, but I just started to think it's like, okay, well, you know, if Dia goes and then, Mochizuki Jr. goes and then Susumu, it's like, okay, well, what's going to happen here? I don't, this one feels really bad. And that's without the context of those J posts.
Yeah.
That is just by what is public between Dia, the company, and the rest of the roster. And again, the rest of the roster thing is the part that has me spooked a little bit about the future of Dragongate.
Yeah, and that's kind of the other aspect of the spiritual bit about this, that this is spiritually damaging. And I don't know, I feel like that, at least for like the last few years, that with the business not kicking back up and then it still kind of draining year to year, and the optic hit and the optic hit and the optic hit, and seeing like how things have kind of seen it, and especially how the native responses have kind of changed over the last, I would say the last like 12 months, I would say, to these sorts of things, that like it does make you wonder like the wellness spiritually of the promotion. And I always like after the whole like Shima Magnum thing, kind of as like our little follow up of that, I've had a lot of people reach out going like, well, what do you see? Is this like the start of the end or like this? I don't see it necessarily like that. Like I do kind of look at certain things in certain ways, that things have happened over the last like year that does make me wonder if the company is looking down the road and how kind of pointed things are. Especially I feel about them like talking about being a Kobe company, and maybe are we looking at a future 10-15 years that the Dragongate ends up being kind of like an Osaka Pro kind of thing, or if it doesn't end up like Michinoku Pro and that kind of thing, but being based around Kobe. And more it's starting to feel like that could be it. But
You know what the problem with that though is, and this is where, you know, the next time we talk
Mhm.
to Jay, which I would imagine would be within the next month, we'll probably do a Golden Coliseum preview with him. We probably need to do an episode with Jay now, but
Right. Yeah. Let's get through the next few weeks, and and we'll try to get that on our schedule. Yeah.
But, you know, the one of the points that he made, I think this was 2 times ago and we had him on, was, you know, the veteran class of the roster is having a hard time handing down duties to the newer generation of, say, local promotion, because they get a cut of those tickets when they sell the tickets locally. And why, if you're based in Osaka and are promoting a show in Osaka and are selling tickets to a show in Osaka, why would you want to give that to somebody else if you're making money from it? And so there hasn't necessarily been the internal system of affairs needed to make that change internally, at least from what I can tell. And when you look at the current state of a Michinoku Pro, and you look at the current state of Osaka Pro, or you look at the current state of a Kyushu Pro, you go, man, they seem to have their local marketing down in a way that, quite frankly, from what I can see, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, but those promotions, those regional promotions, seem to have their regional marketing down in a way that is so much more effective than whatever Dragongate is doing in Kobe, let alone in Hokkaido and in Osaka and Tokyo and whatever.
Yeah. No, that is entirely fair to say about to say about at least thinking about a localized future for Dragon Gate. But maybe like when Jay talks about like these things that haven't necessarily been handed down, is that part of the overall calcification? That the fact that that they have not necessarily had the ability to have this be passed down, and I don't know if it's necessarily out of the veterans or out of the younger guys and that kind of thing. And is that a reality of essentially having a promotion where the inmates have ran the asylum for 30 years essentially, that when it gets to like a certain point of handing over the keys from the car, dad's not willing to hand the keys over? And maybe that's another aspect about this if we look at this from a macro sense as well.
That's exactly what it seems like based on the information that we have from Jay, is that it's a promotion where I don't know if the youth is needed and the youth is not stepping up. The impression that I get is that the youth wants to step up, and there's an old guard that is saying, "No, we're gonna keep on keeping on," and I don't know how you combat that internally, especially when it's an inmates running the asylum type promotion the way that Dragongate is.
Yeah, and when you compare that to like New Japan, that even though you've had like the periods of Inoki and Sakaguchi, and then later with Gato, but like the day to day running of the promotion, like there were a lot of ins and outs and people in control and bookers and foremans, and people got kind of in and out of that. And then you look over Kings Road side, and outside of Baba, who has like the longest run really by himself, if you really want to strip it down to the idea of like great man wrestling running the promotion, and you attribute to one person, Baba has the stretch that no one else really kind of has. But when you look at that, then that like the power structure and like the book and really like control, if we're thinking about it in that kind of way, of the Kings Road promotions outside of Baba Misawa it hasn't been very stable as well. Whereas Dragon Gate, for better and for worse, essentially has had people just, to a point that up before Ryo Saito got announced, that like we could not tell you who the actual real booker, head booker of the promotion was up until a certain kind of point. But if it's the same kind of group for almost 30 years there, and there's not a move of like that, like Yamato or like of that kind of generation, when you're running that kind of style of promotion, questions have to be asked, I feel like.
I think we have enough history now in the one word Dragon Gate era, the Ryo Saito era, August of 2021 through now. Either there were cracks in the sidewalk that were just paved over in a way where nobody could tell. They were hidden from 1999 through largely 2021, with a major exception in 2018 with the OWE departure. There were issues internally, and like I said, and I think this is overlooked historically, there were massive departures, and there were departures often, but we have now this 5-year history where we've just seen things with this promotion where, you and I covering it as closely as we do, and onlookers especially, sort of scratch their chin and go, okay, well, that's odd. And it's a promotion that has still, I think been great. They've had years that have been awesome. They've had debacles. Summer of Kota Minoura, the debacle that was the summer of 2022, but it's been a promotion that has largely been very enjoyable over that time period, even if I have some issues with the way the Dreamgate belt's been handled, even if I have the way with some of the title reigns, and the way that they just feel expedited in a way that doesn't feel right. As I went through Daya's career today, I was looking at his tag team with Madoka Kakuta and going, God, it feels like they should have gotten way more out of that than they did. And that's the tag team that ended the Kame Jason Lee Twingate reign at 0 defenses. And you go, God, they should have gotten way more out of that than they did. So it's been a heavily flawed promotion, even if at times it has been a great promotion. But I think both externally and internally, we now have enough evidence in this new era to go, whatever structural change happened has been a structural change that maybe has not, I don't have enough information to say if it's been for the better or for the worse, but it has created seismic shifts that are noticeable to the public, and that feels troubling.
Right. Yeah. And we could go back to the morale is high or better than it was before 2018 and like those kinds of aspects to it. But I think that now we're almost 8 years after like that kind of seismic change. And then like the move to like the Saito kind of era, and things don't feel right, I feel like. And that's really kind of 3 minutes of just kind of where I'm getting at is that things just don't feel right. And it is feels like much more so than SBK and Fujiwara, much more so than Ishida, much more so than Kazuma Sakamoto. I really go to the OWE split as one that feels like spiritually hurts in a way that I don't know necessarily how easy it is to get to bounce back into the swing of things in the promotion.
Let's talk about the career of Dragon Dia, unless you have anything else to add.
No, let's do.
I have a very long list here of just sort of beat by beat some of the points of Dia's career. You jump in and stop me when I hit something that you want to talk about, but I think it can't be overstated just how big the debut of Dragon Dia felt in November of 2018. You know, we had seen Coach Minoura come in that July. He was the first post OWE split graduate. Dia was the second. At this point in time, we hadn't had Ultimo Dragon back in the fold yet, so we were looking at Dragon Dia specifically as the spiritual successor to Dragon Kid. Dragon Kid, of course, the spiritual successor to Ultimo Dragon. And it felt like there was an effort being made at this time in the fall of 2018 to embrace maybe some Toryumon roots that had been abandoned over the years. Mike, what do you remember about the earliest days of Dragon Dia?
I thought that, and the tape can be ruled about this case. I was not high on him. I thought that the first year and a half of him essentially getting into up until like the Dragongate generation, the three-way generational war 2020, it was a lot of fits and starts and like moments of promise and a real situation where the idea of being the third dragon in the lineage was a real daunting scenario. He wasn't necessarily helped out by they had an issue for a couple of years with masks and who was making masks. If you think about him and Shun Skywalker, but it was a kind of a fits and starts up until really him finding his place amongst people of his generation going into 2020, I feel like.
Yeah, he debuts November 2018, and it's a fine debut match. I mean, it's one that historically I think you should go back and watch if you haven't seen it, but it's not as strong as the Strong Machine J debut from 6 months later, and it's not as strong as some of the debuts we've seen before or since. But what's interesting, and this is during a period of the promotion where I really started to feel like I had my fastball covering it, is this 2019 calendar year where very early in the year, I remember recording a podcast with Alan Forel for Alan's show talking about this new generation of wrestler that Dragongate had that almost felt like some sort of bantamweight, flyweight junior style of wrestler, but something that was a little bit left of center to what Dragongate had been doing. And we got lucky enough to where they put them in the rookie ranking tournament in 2019. I think it was 2 years ago that you and I revisited all of those matches. It's in the archive somewhere, but you and I rewatched those rookie ranking matches. I think it was for the 5-year anniversary, but that was a time where UT finally started to find some sustained health and really come into his own. And Kaito Ishida became a world beater at that point. That's when you and I started getting really high on Ishida. And this is when Shun Skywalker had gone from, hey, here's a fun, wacky undercard wrestler to somebody that, in December of 2018, we thought, okay, future Bravegate champion, probably a really great Twin Gate wrestler, to he's headlining Champion Gate in Osaka in March against Pac for the Dream Gate belt. And there was a 0% chance that he was going to win that match, but it was like, whoa, they have something greater here. So all of a sudden you had this new class of wrestler coming into Dragon Gate, and just by way of generation, Dragon Dia got lumped into that group, and Dragon Dia was a part of that class, even if he was the latest addition in the one that, from an in-ring standpoint, maybe didn't feel akin to a UT or that era of Shun Skywalker or that era of Kota Minoura even. And Dia, spins the rookie ranking tournament. He gets bounced in the first round. I think he broke his collarbone very early in his career. He was battling the flu for a while. Like
Yeah,
Dia debuts in November of 2018, and man, he
he's
is
not
just
a real presence until that fall of 2019.
No,
I
you're
feel
exactly right. He only wrestles 43 matches in 2019, and that includes Prime Zone and dark matches. The first half of the year, he's really not on TV that much. In the second half of the year, like June through November, he's kind of only wrestling Korakuens. Like he was a once or twice a month wrestler. And then Gate of Destiny 2019, and I remember this very well. I think that was the first Royal Sambo they did since Ultimo had come back. And if it wasn't the first, it was one of the really early ones. And Dia won that. And then Dia beat Kazuma Sakamoto in a singles match at Final Gate 2019. And that was, now we're talking about a year into his debut. You've got Yoshioka about to go to Mexico or already in Mexico. Shun either about to go to Mexico or already in Mexico. So you've got some contemporaries there that are well beyond where Dia's at. Again, Coach Minoura, his closest contemporary, not being pushed super hard, but certainly feels more elevated and more present than Dia did by that point. But by the end of 2019, you start to at least get the idea that A, they have some faith in this kid, and B, by this point in time, I was very intrigued by what he was doing. And so as the calendar turns to 2020 and you get this generational warfare between Dragongate and the Toryumon generation and RED, my take on this entire year for Dia is that he was presented as a main character in that story before he had necessarily earned it. We go into the pandemic with one of the weirder Triangle Gate championship teams in history between Dia and Ben K and Strong Machine J. And at that point in time, I feel like he was being pushed above the level that he was actually at. But by the time that storyline ends and Dia jumps to Masquerade at the end of the year, Dia had earned that push and felt supremely more popular than he did at the end of 2020 than he did at the beginning.
Yeah, and I feel like when we talk about the 2020 year, Kota Minoura's breakout fall is the big topic of it. But an underlying thing for that year, well, with that Triangle Gate team was, at least to me, was the idea of like finally Strong Machine J is moving on from Strong Machine Army kind of thing. He is doing things with the roster, and I feel like that was like a constant refrain for me for a long time for him. and for Dia, it was a kind of the first glimpse of him actualizing on the advantage that like Dia got, because I really want to underline like how well he was kind of treated on that debut and how that kind of set him up in a way at a time where the dojo was, fits and starts. This was a symbol, like after the class of 2016 and then 2017 not necessarily having a great standout, and then 2018 it's not that he is like the forerunner for all the like Jackie Kamei and Kabune and 20 and things like this, but it really felt like that after the launch 2020, the front half of the year for him felt like that he was finally getting into form, and it allowed him to end 2020 and really kind of like being the Dragon Kid heir that we were hoping for him to be when he was given the mask, he finally felt like that he was inhabiting that role by the end of 2020 on his own merit.
He ends that year in Masquerade. I guess it's the interesting thing with Daya is he had 3 very specific restarts in his career when you include the debut of him, the beginning of his career, that all felt massive in a way that I'm not sure that I definitely know that every Dragongate wrestler doesn't get handled like this, but I even struggle to find other comps where his debut is made to be such a big deal that the fact that he's hurt and sick and just kind of there for the first year of his career made the hype of his debut detrimental. And he had to really overcome that hurdle to get there. And then he's in the Masquerade repackaging, which, I mean, you and I, lived through that and covered it in real time. And I mean, despite being a COVID era product, I mean, I still think so highly of Dragongate in 2020 and for most of 2021. And when Masquerade showed up in Hokkaido on that December tour, I mean, that felt massive to you, right?
Yeah, and especially like the way that it was the momentum of Shun coming back from the excursion in his first match, winning the Dream Gate, saying, "Oh, I'm not doing this this generational warfare thing. I'm collecting a group to go forward," and really like that 60-day period to end out the year with like Masquerade and then introducing La Estrella was such an exciting kind of way to solidify someone at like such a crucial moment in his career in Shun Skywalker, but it also really kind of allowed a great platform for Daya to become kind of the breakout young guy of that unit when you already had the Minnow Lee tag team and fits and starts. Like it was kind of, it became like the perfect platform for him at that point.
That December of 2020 is so huge for that unit because they debut, they have 3 shows in Hokkaido, they have 2 Korakuen halls that month, they have Final Gate, and they have the year-end show in Kobe, which was headlined by Masquerade versus the Dragongate generation as sort of the finality of that program. And I mean, when I go back and look at my 2020 match of the year spreadsheet, there's so much December 2020 Dragongate in there. And it's all from those Masquerade guys. They just came in and knew exactly what that act was. They looked amazing. They worked as a unit tremendously. And they hit the ground running. The issue is that Daya gets hurt at the end of December of 2020. He's out from the end of that year through Dead or Alive. So he misses the first 4 months of 2021, which is tough because Daya Inferno had been introduced in October of 2020. So this all feels like ancient history now, but you had that weird lame duck period where Daya Inferno gets introduced. You know they're going to build to Daya Inferno versus Dragon Daya in some context. But then Dragon Daya gets hurt. And so Daya Inferno is, he's like wrestling every once in a while, but without Daya there, he doesn't really have a reason to be there. And then I think Daya Inferno gets banged up a little bit after Dragon Daya gets healthy. And it's just a very strange summer where you look at the summer of 2021 and Daya becomes Triangle Gate champion with Jason Lee and with La Estrella. And I remember really liking their matches at World that year. They had the World match and the Speedstar final match, one against RED, the other against Aganisu. So they did the gimmick where they defeated both heel units in one weekend, which was really strong. And I remember Daya being really good in those matches. I remember Daya being really good in the Dead or Alive match where they win the Triangle Gate belts. I remember that match well because Daya's father had passed away. And so Daya dedicated that match to him, and Daya was great. And that was a train wreck La Estrella match. You were just getting hit from so many different angles of quality over the course of one match. But they win those Triangle Gate belts. They hold them for most of the year. And then we eventually do get this payoff with Daya and Daya Inferno, a feud that I don't think anybody goes like, God, remember how great that feud was, all those interesting chapters along the way. But what matters is they stuck the landing on the payoff, created, I would say, one of the 5 most memorable, maybe 10 most memorable moments in Dragon Gate history on 12/1/21. It's the crux of Dragon Daya's career. It is the thing that made Shun Skywalker Shun Skywalker. It is the thing that Daya will forever be remembered by in my mind. And they nailed that, and Dragon Dia is at the center of one of the most memorable things to happen in the history of Dragongate in that mask versus mask tag match.
Yeah, and uh, I the thought I have about 12-1-21, I'm going to put a pin on just because we'll talk about it and when we put a bow on this, because it feels like that essentially modern era of Dragon Gate started with that match, and that everything really has been in service for the last 5 years almost of like everything, the fallout and everything kind of coming back together and people coming back together, and like all of that was based off of um the fact that Shun Skywalker turned on Dia on during that match, and
I
maybe
think
that
I
era
think
is
it's
done.
undeniable. I agree. I think it's undeniable that that is the match that kickstarted modern day Dragon Gate, and that's sort of my question going forward is how they handle the presence of Dia, because the
Mhm.
reason I want to go through this timeline and the way that we're doing it is you see, especially after that match, because Dan say, oh, 2019 he's there, he beats Cosmo Sakamoto. 2020, okay, Triangle Gate champion, whatever, but if they choose to handle Dia and his departure the way that they've handled some of the other departures, where they try to erase Dia from history or conveniently ignore him from certain things, you're losing your 2020s, because this guy's been involved in almost everything that's mattered since that day.
Yeah, that was what I was putting a pen on because I didn't know if you wanted to get into that, because
No, please go
that's
ahead.
because like, well, when I talk about like the spiritual hurt of this loss and like a fact of things that are missing, and like now more so than the other departures, this is the kind of feeling it's because like you think about the the kids that they always bring up into the ring for, like when they restarted doing First Gong Kids, and like with us, the name that's always kind of brought up is that when they ask my favorite wrestler, it's more often than not Dragon Dia. And it's just like, how can a family, like parent, go back to a company and like, and especially given how just like price of living and all of this, and fork out the money for like their kids, like that the company that they go to visit, and their kid's favorite wrestler is essentially going to get deleted from the narrative, and like but you're going to have a constant reminder of that case because the company is too cheap to replace their banner, so Dia is going to be looking down at like your kids as like a reminder of like, oh, he's not here anymore, and now you're still here. Like, how can you take your kids to the shows at that point if they go about deleting like the history? Like, if I was a parent and like in that kind of scenario there, and like my kid's favorite wrestler is essentially like getting screwed over, you know, the thing I'm doing for the next time that Dia shows up, I'm going to that promotion and not Dragon Gate anymore. Like, that's like a real, like, I for lack of better words, like moral risk that Dragon Gate, with the way that they operate, is risking to put themselves into right now by deleting the potential history of Dragon Dia.
Well, the problem is that history is ongoing and lingering, because after the mask versus mask match, we get the formation of D Courage, and maybe it's the type of thing that we've become used to because Dia, as strange as this is, has existed for longer as a wrestler without a mask than he was a wrestler with a mask. But Dia coming out on that skateboard at the January 2022 Korakuen, the first night he beats SB Kento for the Brave Gate title in 90 seconds. The second night he and Yoshioka win the Twin Gate belts, and they form D Courage from there. That's the third big chapter in his career. You have his debut, you have Masquerade, and then you have D Courage. And, we can pause on the history of Dia for just a second, because, Mike, what the hell do you do with D Courage now?
Oh, D Courage is dead. Like, it's a shambling corpse that is going to exist until they maybe at Korakuen on Monday, Yoshioka and Tanaka say it's dead, but it's dead. It's dead. Sorry, Marcus Mathers, you joined it like 33 days until like its heart is getting ripped out.
because the solution can't be to just put Monte in Daya's spot and act like nothing ever happened, right?
No, there's absolutely no way, and that's a fraudulent thing, that if they do that, then that's just
Doesn't it feel like they
really...
might do that, though?
Yeah, and I mean, that then makes me go look at the people making decisions in this company again, because like that's exactly not what should happen. Like what should happen is like Daya is left. He is as like the soul of Courage. We are going to go our separate ways. You know, like that's like the only thing to do. You can't treat this like fucking over generation or the last few weeks of Monster Express. Like you have to like just immediately just go like it's over, it's done with.
But the problem is, and this is why I can't ignore this possibility, is you just reshuffle the deck with Vibes, and Vibes is working, and Gucci is incredible. So you just for his sake alone, I wouldn't want to touch Vibes. Paradox is unspectacular, but there, and they serve a purpose. And right now, I wouldn't necessarily want to tinker with Paradox. If they touch Love and Peace, I might quit covering the promotion. So we're just going to leave Love and Peace alone. You would assume that between Minoura and Ishin, you have some sort of face turn coming and some sort of minor shakeup happening with Gaja Dokuro. But for all we know, that person could then trickle down into Saipatra. And so you look at the unaffiliated guys, and it's Monte. And if you want to get really creative, which this company doesn't always seem to want to do, it's Kazuma Komura and Ryu Fuda. But we just went through the Vibe shakeup, and all the other units feel pretty solidified right now. I mean, again, unless you want to break up Paradox, which I'd hear you out on, but that just doesn't seem like something that Dragongate would want to do right now. So you break up D-Courage. Let's say Dragongate agrees with you. They go, okay, well, we can't have the D-Courage without the D part of it. Now you're talking about the two guys who I think are the favorites to headline Kobe World this year, either Yoshioka or Tanaka. And where do they go? What do they do from there?
I think you almost have Paradox absorb them. Like you go like this. And
God, that feels... I'm not saying you're wrong, but that feels ice cold. Just being pitched it.
Or you got to do like a brand new unit, and one of the two has to go do something else, because you can't have them just immediately start a new unit. But like it's tough, because then you're like, okay, where does Tanaka go versus what should Yoshioka do? And then it's just like you don't really... there are the units that are now solidified that you don't really want to mess with, and then you wonder, could you go for another unit at this point, or another two units? And I don't think you can go for 2 units, so someone has to join a new unit if you break up D-Courage, which, sorry to take everyone down that route, but I don't know what the good answer is at this point. That's why I went with Paradox.
I mean, I've been pitching a Yoshioka heel turn for 3 years, but a Yoshioka heel turn at this moment in time is the least appealing thing I've ever heard. And I don't even think... I mean, it would be bad in execution, but it wouldn't even make sense from a storyline perspective. So I don't think you can get away with Yoshioka turning on Tanaka at this point in time. This is not good. I think they're in trouble here. I think they're just going to stick Monte and D-Courage for the time being and call it D-Courage.
God, that's just gross.
I don't know. I'm not.
It feels
this is
bad.
not a company
like,
that.
yeah.
This is not a company that takes a lot of wild swings with their units, and I'm just struggling to think of what the swing is here. What they'd even be trying to make contact with.
Right. Yeah. Because it's not... Because we have the full card for Gate of Passion on April 6th. Tanaka versus Junior in the opener. And then the semi-main event, the 10th anniversary debut special tag team match. And the pairings are Shun and Ben versus Hyo and Yoshioka. And I don't feel like Yoshioka is going to like figure into that match. Like that feels like... You know what the bold thing and the big swing is that Hyo should pin Skywalker in that match. Like that's what they should do in that match, not turn.
Yeah, but Skywalker's headlining your pay-per-view at the end of April. I think you're right, but I don't think they can do that.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one person who I immediately go to and go like, who he's not one of one, he's not going to become like Dragon Panther or anything like that, but the one person that I feel like is best equipped to step into that position, and if not take that position and go further with it, it would have been Hyo. And yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm looking at the show. Like, I don't know what you do with Yoshioka other than him coming out and challenging. No, uh, yeah, like he's on kind of on ice until after Golden Coliseum at the very least, right? Like in the Dreamgate picture.
It seems like because they have the card laid out the way that they do, and this is not what I would do. I would figure out the direction of D-Courage at this Korakuen show, and
Yeah,
I would do an angle to either keep it or get rid of it, but not let it linger and let it fester. But it does seem like they can buy themselves a month and handle this after Golden Coliseum if they have to, which is not what I would advise them to do, but I think it's what they're going to do.
yeah, because Golden Coliseum is pretty well set up at this point. The section, with the exception of really Triangle Gate at this juncture and Dreamgate, I guess, but we'll see what happens with that coming out of it. It does feel like it's that with the card construction and with everything happening with like their statement case, doesn't it? In like a weird way, I feel like Dragon Gate was caught completely unaware with this, or at least is acting like they were that they've been kind of kept unaware given how this card is constructed.
I think they're acting like they're completely unaware, but when I
Yeah.
know that Dragon Dai is leaving the company, I would hope that the people working within Dragon Gate would also be aware of that.
No, that is very true. You're dead on about that.
So I don't have the card in front of me. So it's Tanaka versus Junior, and it's Ben and Shun against Yoshioka and Hyo.
Right.
Yeah, I wonder if they just throw them in Love and Peace.
A 7-person Love and Peace.
Oh, you got 7 people in Gaja Dokuro. You got 6, including
Yeah.
Flamita and Vibes. You've got 6 in Paradox.
Yeah. And it could be Ben and Hyo try to get Yuki his smile back as a storyline.
Yeah, that's really what I want out of this year. Is I want them to do something with the class of 2016. I mean, I lobbied for Ben Hyo Yoshioka 6-mans during WrestleMania weekend to celebrate the class of 2016. I don't think that's going to happen, but I don't think anybody booked that. But that was my idea to everybody that asked me, was you got to do something there. I mean, that would, that feels like that would solve a lot of problems if you just put together a super unit for a little bit, because then you can break up Homare and CLO. Again, for as much as I love Valletta, I don't really need him back. But then you're taking Ben out of Love and Peace, and even as I watched that Kobe show, I was going, I think Love and Peace on paper is one of the best things this promotion has ever had, period. And I still think
was almost 4 stars on that match.
On the 8-man, the semi-main event.
Yeah, no, it was great.
Yeah.
It was, if it was in the main event and it was given main event time, I would have been notebook on it.
I just think that unit is still, and I understand, they were Triangle Gate champions and Twin Gate champions at the start of the year. They're still Twin Gate champions. I just think that unit is wildly underpushed, and I don't understand why the promotion isn't revolving around Love and Peace at this point. And we've seen them have success with that, because we'll hop back on the Dia timeline here just briefly. I want to finish this out, but 2022 is the best year of his career because he wins the Brave Gate belt, he wins the Twin Gate belt. That Champion Gate in Osaka, he has the Takuma Fujiwara Brave Gate match the first night, and then he's in that great Twin Gate match the second night. That's Dia and Yoshioka versus Eita and Maria versus Hyo and SB Kento, which might as well have taken place 35,000 years ago at this point. Dead or Alive 2022 is built around Dia wrestling 2 matches, the Brave Gate match and the Twin Gate match. His Brave Gate reign gets bogged down a little bit after Dead or Alive because he kind of becomes the third man in a Hyo SB Kento story that never gets resolved because Kento left for Mexico and then never returned. But his Brave Gate reign that time around sort of ends with a whimper. But after World that year, he goes into a team with Kakuta, And they're a great tag team. Again, Jason and Jackie win the Twin Gate belts from Shun and Monte at World that year. One of the best matches in company history. 0 successful defenses. They lose in their first defense to Dai and Kakuta, which is a move that I still disagree with, and it's a move that I wish they wouldn't have done. But Dai and Kakuta together were a great team. When you go back and look at the SFM 50 that year, this is not overall, but I put Dai 7th on my ballot, which I believed caused Joe Lanza severe health problems. He was so upset with me. And he finished really, really well in the rankings that entire year. 2023 is an odd year for Dai because he doesn't really get pushed anywhere near as strongly as he did in 2022. But he's just really good. He's in a bunch of just really, really fun multi-man matches throughout the year. And in one of those other weird curveballs for Dai, this affected Kakuta, and this affected Tanaka, and of course Yoshioka. But right when they add Tanaka to the group, they have the one match as a 4-man unit, and then Yoshioka hurts his eye, and he's gone for an extended period of time. So 2024, when you roll into that year with Yoshioka hurt, D-Courage becomes this weird lame duck unit where like Daya's in Rey de Parejas with Dragon Kid that year, and it just doesn't seem like he has a lot going on. It's sort of the first time since 2020 that he feels a little bit lost, but then he goes and wrestles in the Super Juniors tournament, and everybody knows that story where, Gato in particular, it's been noted, he is not a very big fan of Dragon Dia, but Gato does not have final say, or even the way it's been explained to me at times, a ton of say in the juniors division. And so the people that like Dia won out. He goes there. He has an average showing in Super Juniors, but it connects with the Dragongate audience because it was the first time in over a decade that it had sent somebody to that tournament. And Dia comes back, for World that year, and they do Dia versus Hyo. Hyo's in the midst of a really strong Bravegate run. Dia feels really hot. That was the hottest Bravegate match in years up to that point. I mean, maybe since Dia versus Kento at Dead or Alive 2022, but if not, you'd have to go back to long before that. Maybe Kento versus UT from 2021. It would be something in that Kento era of the Bravegate run. Dia wins the belt there. It's an okay Bravegate run, but sort of like the Dia Inferno storyline. It's okay, but the thing that really needed to be great was great, and that was Dia versus Yamato, Final Gate 2024, title versus title. They nail the series of Dia beats Yamato in the King of Gate opening round. Dia beats Minoura in the King of Gate finals, and then they have this incredible match at Final Gate 2024. And that, to me, will forever be the legacy match of Dragon Dia.
Yeah, and it gave us a moment, at least, winning King of Gate and going into the match with Yamato, where it did kind of leave you with like the air of, man, he is almost at that moment eclipsing for one night where Dragon Kid ever got to. Like it was easily like his peak, his zenith, but it also in a lot of ways became, I mean, if you want to talk about like moments of the Dragon lineage, like virtually my expectation, and we'll see how things like really kind of change. I don't think we'll see a Dragon Dia 2 anytime soon, but it feels like the last great moment of the Dragon lineage. Now that we know that that moment and the lineage, at least at this point, is done. I mean, is it a bigger moment at its time than Kid versus Darkness Dragon at Absolutamente 02? I don't know. Like, that's kind of where you would kind of compare the two together, at least with those two. And Ultimo has had, I would argue, bigger moments than that. But it felt like it was the peak for him. Absolutely.
And what it did to bring this full circle is it just sort of put Dia on a level that he hadn't been at previously. And so as you roll into 2025, he was a guy,
who became a guy.
Yeah, and it's sort of like in the nebulous that Hyo exists in right now, where he sniffed that Dreamgate belt. I think we all felt like, okay, he didn't win it there. That's the closest he's ever going to get to it. But just structurally, he matters to Dragongate so much now. And so in 2025, it's a lot of the Yuki Yoshioka rehab project. And it's things like him being in the Tanahashi match at Kobe World and nobody batting an eye. Everybody kind of going like, yeah, this is kind of what Dragon Dia should be doing. If Tanahashi's going to stop by Dragongate and work a tag match, Dragon Dia feels like he's in the right place being in that match. And, that carried him through the end of 2025. We saw him and Marcus Mathers have a Twin Gate match right before Dia's exit at the end of February. And it's a bummer, it is an absolute bummer that Dragon Dia is gone. I think you nailed it. 12-1-21 really started the modern era of Dragongate in the same way that maybe Naruki Doi joining Blood Generation defined a certain era through, God, when would you say that ends? Yamato winning the Dreamgate belt in 2010, maybe, and then kind of that Yamato into Blood Warriors in Junction 3. That sort of ends when Shingo wins that Dreamgate belt in 2013, and then Yamato winning the Dreamgate belt in 2013 from Shingo, I think is another 5-year era that ends with the OWE split. But he's just a guy that when you look at things from 2021 on, almost everything that mattered he was involved with. He was one of Coach Minoura's best opponents. He was one of Shun Skywalker's best opponents. He was one of UT's best opponents. I always really liked the work that he and Madoka Kakuta did with one another as a tag team and against one another as opponents. It's a loss that is going to be felt by this promotion in the ring and out of the ring, and it feels much different than a lot of the other recent departures. I guess the final thought I have on this, because I was thinking about this today, is, Eita was a much bigger star when Eita left Dragongate than Dragon Dia was. Because Eita was a former Dreamgate champion, Grand Slam champion, one of the most successful wrestlers in the history of the company. But Eita never, he was an odd guy, and you and I would talk about how Eita didn't really feel like he belonged in Dragongate at times, even when he was being pushed and featured super heavily. And then, he and Dragongate worked out the deal to where he would be slowly phased out, and by the time that Eita actually left, it's not like a lot of people went, "Hey, where's Eita?" It was a slow exit and one that was beneficial for both parties. This Dia one is different. Dia felt to the core like a Dragongate wrestler, and it'll be interesting to see when he pops up again, if he is one of those guys that is just so talented that he succeeds wherever he goes, or if he's one of those guys that just makes more sense in this promotion specifically, but it's a promotion that he can no longer call home.
Yeah, and I think that the overall, at least to me, case, the Dia situation will have kind of more, like, not even big picture as it relates to Dragongate, but big picture as it relates to the Japanese wrestling landscape conversations as this situation kind of moves. I do think that it's not just the end of an era in Dragongate. I think that there's a new working order that is going to be so drastically different from what we've seen, at least in the 2020 so far. And this is just the start.
Quickly, Mike, any thoughts on the Kobe Sambo Hall show before we preview this Korakuen Hall show coming up next week?
Yeah, so they were in Kobe Sambo Hall on the 29th. I'm just going to pull up. I didn't even have my notes for it actually pulled up for this. I figured we were going to go that deep on Dia and not have time for this. But as we were talking about very briefly, that Atomico, Ben, Jackie Rita, and Juno versus the original Jimmys and Not Hug, it was just real great stuff. Like, it had some pep for it. The sprint section of it was really, really exceptional. And Case, I have an idea that if this happens, this is how we get out of the doldrums. This is how we're able to start to rebuild. We have coming out of that match a double tag team match in Aichi titles. Original Jimmy's putting on the Soryo Ryukyu Dragon tag team belts against the Open the Dreamgate titles of Jackie Rita. What if somehow we get a triple crown of tag team belts on Jackie Rita? And the All Asia goes on them next. Wouldn't that be a fun thing to at least hang our hat on for 2026?
I mean, God, yeah. I feel like I don't want to be the person to run that idea by All Japan Pro Wrestling. I feel like they have a very specific idea of what wrestlers are, and it is not Jackie Kame or Rita. And I think they're worse off for that, by the way. But yeah, I would be very entertained by that idea.
And like other than that, on like the show, the
Real
main
quick on that match, I want to point out, I know the upcoming matches, Susumu and Kagatora challenging for those belts, but there is some, and I mentioned this anytime they're in the ring together, there is some Rita Doi chemistry that is just impossible to ignore. And Lord knows I don't have the pencil in this company right now, but if I did, I would have Kame and Rita win this match, and I would immediately begin building to Yamadoi challenging for the Twin Gate belts at World, and I would have Jackie and Rita win that match as well.
it can be a Triple Crown tag team title match.
Yeah, man, Rita and Doi together, that is what I like out of wrestling. Those guys are so good with one another. And unfortunately, for the guys involved in that Golden Coliseum tag, Kame, Rita, Susumu, Kagatora, the expectation is they have a match of the year contender, and it is unfair to ever put people in that position. But with those guys and their history of tag team wrestling, that's what I'm expecting out of them on that show.
Yeah, I mean, it's big match Jack's time to bail out a Dragon Gate show once again by having a 4 3/4 star tag team match that we scream about and try to get people to see, and they think that we're just raving idiots. I see how the future is going to play out for us, bud.
What other thoughts do you have on Kobe?
I liked the show close angle. The main event was Saipatra versus Kota Minoru, Ishin, and Kato. Basically a crowd brawl kind of central, and then it kind of built up after a Kato and Cielo face off there. It was a misfire into an SSW on Ishin. Cielo goes for scissors on Kato, but then Minoru breaks it up, goes after Hamare's hair, cuts his hair. Hamare loses it, and they just have one of the wilder pull-apart brawls that I think we've seen in wrestling in a long period of time. It goes on for essentially the next 10 minutes as Shun's trying to cut a promo, shit-talking Big Boss Shimizu. Hamare spits at Minoru. They start fighting again. They spontaneously fight during like the last parts of Shun's promo, and then right after that, Kato attacks Cielo. Love the chaos of the post-match more so than the match itself, but it does feel like we are moving on to a plan B of maybe having a Hamare and Minoru in on that cage as well, with no real answer about Shimizu's condition right now.
Yeah, I have no feel for where they're going with that cage match. I mean, obviously the intrigue here is the ongoing issues between Minoru and Ishin. And I thought once this match actually got into the ring, which it took a long time to get there, but once it got into the ring, I found the action to be pretty solid. But for a Big 5 show main event that is less than a month away, and this isn't even inherently a flaw, I'm just surprised that I'm having such a hard time gleaning any possible direction from it. I really have no idea what they want to do with that cage match this year.
Yeah, and it feels like a weird cage match, and in the way of like the Parahouse and Karible cage match that seemed to exist to do a big show main event for SPK before he was off on excursion. Like it does kind of have a little bit of that kind of energy, at least with it, but like I don't really have a feeling other than Shun's not losing his mask. Everything else I feel like is at play at this point, with nothing feeling a lot like a good, strong, like long-term direction. Like before all of this, I thought Kato was getting his haircut, or Shimizu maybe had to get his haircut as like a punishment dating back to last year for whatever like all of that was. But now, no idea other than Shun's not losing his mask.
I really like the opening match on this show as well. Tanaka and Yoshioka versus Aki and UT. It's just a style of wrestling that I really enjoy. This was actually, cage match has it listed as Aki and UT, but this was Aki and Gucci, was it not?
Yeah, Aki and Gucci, and Aki like taking the heat for this match was great.
Yeah, Gucci is for me now a shoo-in for 30 under 30 this year. I think he's absolutely incredible. He's been one of my favorite wrestlers to watch in 2026, and I thought he and Tanaka had sublime chemistry in this match. As Tanaka continues to rack up these Bravegate defenses, I understand why UT is getting the match in Aichi. I wish it was Dragon Kid. I'm okay with the rematch. I really hope before this reign is over that we get Tanaka versus Gucci. I think that is at this point a bona fide Bravegate caliber match.
Yeah, and especially now a Bravegate match for Gucci where he is not like coming in as like the loser who just wants the Bravegate back, but like as a legit performer. I feel like is an interesting match potentially on offer. Should we look at this Korakuen coming up on Monday?
Oh, let's do it.
All right. We've talked a little bit around this show. We're opening with Ryoya Tanaka versus Mochizuki Jr. Match 2, Kazuma Kimura and Jiro Shimbashi tagging. So I guess we get the class of 2025 out there together versus Jason Lee and Ishin. Ultimo, Monte, and Punch versus Toru Iwashi, Takashi, and Mondai Ryu. Yamato, Dragon Kid, BB Hulk, and Doi versus Strong Machine J, KZ, Gucci, and Aki. Match 5, Hamare and El Cielo versus Minoru and Kato. Case, this is the way that we get to match 6 is the way that we get to my idea of Jackie Rita holding 3 sets of tag belts, because it's a twin gate Sobrio tag and all Asia tag prelude 4-way match. Jackie, Kamei, and Rita, the twin gate champions, versus the Sobrio tag team champions, the original Jimmys, the all Asia tag team champions, Mochi Fuji versus the challengers in Fukuoka coming up in I think 2 weeks. Genki Horiguchi and Azushi Kanda. Semi-main event is that 10th anniversary of the class of 2016's debut, Shun Skywalker and Benkei versus Hyo and Yuki Yoshioka. And the main event, they open the Dreamgate title made at the impromptu battle royal on the Gajidoku Produce show. Madoka Kakuta versus Kai.
I have 3 thoughts on this card. One, I think this is the coldest Dreamgate match since maybe Yoshida versus Kai in 2022. I'm not saying it's going to be bad, but I'm certainly not looking forward to it. On the flip side, I think the class of 2016 tag match is the most excited I've been about a match on paper in Dragongate this year. I am very excited for that. And Mike, I'm going to say some words that I've never, ever said before, but as I look at this 4-way tag match with Kame Rita, Susumu Kagatora, Mochi Fuji, and Genki Horiguchi and Yasushi Kanda, Genki Horiguchi can fuck off. He is one of my favorite wrestlers ever. I cannot deal with him having serious matches in 2026. I thought they were stretching it with that Bravegate match, but for them to come back around and now have him in an all-Asia tag match, and look, it's all Japan belts, it's an undercard thing in Dragongate. Ultimately, who cares? I can't fucking deal with more hobbled, broken Genki Horiguchi wrestling actually important matches. That is the type of thing that at this company in 2018, when they were at their lowest, we were getting a lot of big Yasushi Kanda matches and big Punch Tamanaga matches and big Cybercog matches. That is the sort of thing that I cannot stand in this promotion. And Horiguchi has become the poster child for being the worst offender of this in 2026.
So we're going to get Horiguchi getting his knee worked versus Don Fuji, who has had his career being based on his knee getting worked in Fukuoka. At least it's a Fukuoka
I am not looking forward to that match at all. I am really sour on the presence of Genki and Kanda right now, and it's going to bleed into Mochi and Fuji before long.
Yeah, and it's also so much of a West Japan play too. Like, it's in Fukuoka, so Genki Horiguchi has to have something to do, I guess.
I guess, feel right. I don't know. I'm not into it.
No, I hear you, but you said 3 things, but and I think you got off on a tangent.
No, Dreamgate, I'm not excited for. 2016 class, I'm really excited for, and Genki Horiguchi, as of right now, can fuck off.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No,
Genki was point number 3.
Okay. Yeah. I thought that was a tangent, but it was not. I'm interested to see more serious Jiro. I largely agree with what you said about those 3 big points, but I'm really ready for Jiro to be doing serious things because the match against Hyo on Kobe was just took forever. And it was all character work, which I like, but I want to see more of this guy doing more things, and hopefully being in this kind of context. I think this is actually his first tag match on TV too. So
that'll be fun. He's become somebody that I enjoy in small doses. I found the Hyo match on Kobe to be about 5 minutes too long for a 10-minute match, but I'm curious to see what he does on this show.
I hear you on that, and we'll be back next week to talk all about that case. I think that's everything we have on, at least on my point list about Daya. Any last thoughts?
No, I do not have any.
All right. You could follow us on social media at Open VoiceGate. That's both Twitter and Blue Sky. Cases at _ in your case. On Twitter, I'm at Fujiheya there as well. The Voices of Wrestling Discords, where we post all about Open the VoiceGate in the Open the VoiceGate channel. That's where we'll have match listings for our historical and those days content. Whenever we have schedule updates, we post those as well as the Discord having a Dragongate channel. A lot of discussion in there, of course, today with the news about Daya. But that's going to do it for us this week. We'll be back with you next time. Take care, everyone.
Hello, do you like New Japan Pro Wrestling? Are you a Shin Nihon freak? If so, check out the Super J-Cast with Joel and Damon on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network.
And even if you fucking hate New Japan Pro Wrestling, listen to the Super J-Cast anyway. Not just for our great show reviews, analysis, and pastrami sandwiches, but there's also usually some dick jokes somewhere in the obligatory opening 30 minutes of absolute nonsense we chat about every single week. That's the Super J-Cast for all the best talk about New Japan Pro Wrestling, crisps, and pornography.